Alrighty, welcome back. So in the last video we talked about the form of entertainment from the Italian Renaissance that has still survived and is still thriving, that is opera. What we're going to be talking about in the next couple videos was the most popular form of entertainment from the Italian Renaissance. And this is a style that is still being practiced in Italy. You can still go to colleges and take special programs in this performance style. But as a mass entertainment, it has not so much died out as it has evolved into very weird ways, and we're going to talk about that a little later on. But the art form of which I am speaking is called Commedia dell'Arte. And what Commedia dell'Arte was an improvised form of street theater. So what you would have is you would have a group of actors, usually about 10 or so, usually broken down to 7 men and 3 women. It's important to note, let's take a little sidebar here. It is important to note that this is one of the first times in history that we have records of professional female actors. Up until this point in history, women had not been allowed on stage. Men played all the parts, and we're going to see that tradition still going on when we reach the Elizabethans. So what we have here, though, is the first time that you had female actors. The female characters were played by actual women. Anyway, however, I digress. You had this group of actors, usually about 10 of them, and they would travel around in these show wagons, kind of like the wagons that they would use to create the stages for the cycle plays. And they would travel around and they would go to all of these different towns. They would set up in a town square. They would perform their show, sometimes maybe just once, or they'd stay there for a week or so, and then they'd pack the whole kit and caboodle up and move on to the next town. And they would travel all around Europe performing these plays. I mentioned that these plays were improvised, and if you're not familiar with that term, improvisation means making it up as you go along. So there were no set scripts for a commedia performance. What they would have instead is what we would call scenarios. So they would have a script, and it'd be like scenario 1, scenario 2, scenario 3. We're going to talk a little bit more about what these stories would generally be a little later on. But they would have these set scripts that would just kind of have the very loosest of plots broken down. There'd be no dialogue. It would be, just this needs to happen, this needs to happen, this needs to happen, this needs to happen. And so the actors would arrive at a town and they'd say, okay, today we're going to do scenario 3. And they would all know the basic scenario, and they would go up and make up the story. Now, as we'll also discover later, they weren't always making these up just right off the top of their heads. They would have pre-rehearsed bits and certain elements that would continue and be consistent. But for the most part, the comedy that they were creating was all improv. And I think that's also an important thing, hence the term Commedia dell'Arte. These were comedies. These were slapstick comedies. Okay? As I mentioned a few moments ago, these were traveling shows. And they would travel all throughout Europe. They would go all around. So you would be performing for different towns, different cities, different peoples, different backgrounds, sometimes entirely different languages. So the question that you have to ask is, how do you communicate a story effectively to an audience without the cultural background, without the shared language? How do you still tell an effective story to an audience like that? Well, the Commedia performances had a few tricks up their sleeves to try to make them as universal as possible. And one of the elements of a Commedia performance that helped make it a little bit more universal was known as stock characters. Commedia relied very, very heavily on stock characters. Now, we've heard that term tossed around here and there through our previous lectures. We talked about it a little bit with the Romans, that the Romans enjoyed stock characters in their comedy, but we've never taken a moment to really stop and ask, what is a stock character? So before we move on and talk about the stock characters that were popular in a Commedia performance, let's first make sure that we are all clear on the term stock character. So the easiest definition of a stock character or characters would be a stereotypical person whom audiences recognize from frequent reoccurrences. So what this means is that you watch TV, you watch movies, and within certain genres, it's very important to note that this is very genre specific. If you watch a certain genre, a certain type of movie or TV show for any length of time, what you're going to notice is that the same type of character tends to pop up in every one. Think about the different genres that are out there. Think about romantic comedies, think about horror movies, think about action movies, comic book movies, think of different television shows, think of Disney movies. Disney movies are a great example of a studio that uses the same basic type of character over and over and over again. This is to create a recognition with the audience so that an audience sees a certain type of character multiple times, and without having to be told, they automatically know who that character is and what their role in the story is generally supposed to be. Let's take a look at an example. Look at the characters on this slide. Look at them. I would lay odds that without having to be told, you can look at the 5 characters represented here, and you would automatically know who they are, what their character type is, where this story takes place, and what each character's role within that world is supposed to be. You don't have to be told, you just know. Just look at it. You've got the jock, you've got the chipper cheerleader, you've got the nerd, you've got the mean girl, you've got the artsy girl with glasses and a ponytail and coveralls, who you know when she takes off those glasses and lets that hair down, she's gonna be hot. These are archetypes, stock types, that you have been conditioned to because you've seen them over and over and over and over again. And this is true in every form of entertainment, every genre. All right, and that is just one example. I bet that if you take a look at any form of entertainment that's out there, any genre, and you're going to find that every genre has the stock characters that are specific to that genre. Look at any form of entertainment. Think about it. For those of you who are fans of scary movies or horror movies, I bet that if you think about it, you find that there are the same types of characters in every single one of those movies. Look at romantic comedies, superhero movies. Superhero movies, especially the Marvel ones, are very reliant on stock characters. In almost all of them, you have the same breakdown. You have our main hero. You have, that hero usually has some kind of sarcastic best friend. There's the love interest girlfriend. There's the villain. You can see these archetypes pop up in every single one of them. Think of doctor shows. Think of sitcoms. Think of children's television. Now, I don't know about you all, because you're young and I'm old, but when I was a lad, and there were things on television like Ninja Turtles, Power Rangers, Chip 'n Dale's Rescue Rangers. I mean, most of these things have been rebooted. But anything that had a team dynamic, that team would have the same archetypes. You'd have the leader, you'd have the brain, you would have the goof-off, you'd have the muscle, you'd have the cute one that was there for comic relief. Every single time. So why does entertainment rely so heavily on this? Doesn't it seem a little cheap? Well, they rely on it for the same reason that the Commedia performances relied on it, because it is instantaneous recognition. You don't have to explain to an audience who the characters in that high school show are. They look at them, they look at the way they're dressed, and automatically, boom, I know who that is, and I know what role they are meant to play in this production. Now, obviously, some shows, the more successful ones, find ways to play around with those archetypes or subvert them in different ways. But the fact of the matter is that visual shorthand for the audience is a way to make sure that your audience understands the story, even if they don't speak the same language. Okay? So this is why Commedia leaned so heavily on those archetypes, and they had several that appeared in just about every company. Keep in mind that there wasn't just one Commedia company, there were dozens, hundreds of them, all over the country, all moving around, and yet they all kind of relied on the same core group. What we're going to talk about next time is who were the popular characters that popped up in Commedia performances.